everyone's hyped about the 1 million token context window. More context equals better results, right? Wrong. Bigger context doesn't actually mean better performance, and it's definitely more expensive. Here's what actually matters and the few use cases where it's generally basically 1 million token context window is a trap. And why is that? It's because it sounds incredible, you know, you're getting promised that you can have up to 750,000 words of the same conversation and you can use all of that context. But in reality, what happens is that you have worse performance, you go through your budget much faster, and you basically have this false sense of security that also Anthropic, when they launched the million token window, you know, we're saying, I never clear your context window, it will work amazingly, and we'll just be, we all live in a fucking fairy tale world, essentially. And studies or tests now have essentially shown that you're dealing with the exact same problem of context rot. A separate video on context rot is essentially the LLM, as the context window fills up, it gets dumber. And what happens is that the early context gets buried. It starts ignoring instruction. We start to see hallucination, see contradiction, and we starting to get drift from the plan that you had initially. And this is exactly the same, no matter if it's 200K window or a million window, after about 20% of the context window size, right? So essentially for the first 200K, you know, context, we'll get great performance, then we get decay, and then basically unusable after, you know, over 500K. And we have benchmarks now that, you know, test this multi-needle retrieval, and they say for the first 250K tokens, we have 93% accuracy, and we have 250K, 256K, we see a 17% drop in accuracy. And then that means that 25% accuracy total lost after those 250K tokens, which means I wouldn't have that model as something I want to rely on with complex work, right? So if you do very simple things and it's all very recent in context, that might be okay. But if you're, for example, creating an entirely new plan and you're trying to execute a new plan after this window is already a quarter full, you're just gonna have a bad time. And so also on X, people have been reporting this, right? So essentially first 15%, past 10%, it starts hallucinating, being confidently wrong. And it says that, you know, there's bug report, fabricates numbers, not querying properly. So all the issues you've had before with the 200K context window model after 50 to 60,000. So it's essentially the same, right? It's just more absolute tokens, but the issues are exactly the same. The bigger downside here is that we're using a lot more tokens because we're obviously building on top of an already fuller context window, which doesn't necessarily actually give us better results. And this is also something that has happened with the recent kind of explosion and people hitting their session limit. Of course, there's also things going on like the rug pulling or whatever, but essentially this is another reason. Like basically there were multiple ones, right? And we get all these big effects because we have multiple issues happening at the same time, and they just made it the default, which means that we get this false sense of security. Okay, I can fill this up, it will perform really well, and I can just inject a lot more files because now suddenly I have so much more space to fill, right? So this is all things that will make you hit your rate limits much faster, especially if you're going in with a cold start. If it doesn't hit the cache, because agents rely a lot on the token cache, which is much, much cheaper and fills your limits much more slower. And you never clear out that context. In theory, you just come back a day later or 2 days later, and then you hit a cold cache and your first request hits like 500K previous tokens. That's gonna fill your session limits, I don't know, with a couple of messages essentially, right? And so I would suggest either to always keep an eye on your context window, how full it is, and to clear it, you know, once you hit quarter. Or what you can do is over here, you can also just disable it and you can continue using the smaller context window. Because let's be honest, there's not really that many reasons to use the bigger context window. It's usually that you didn't properly plan something, or you're just trying to fit too many things within the same context window, which means it's bold. It's not a good idea, you know? So I think most things are possible with the smaller context window, with some exceptions. And here are kind of the exceptions that I see. So when you actually want to use this is essentially you want to do non-reasoning tasks. So summarizing something, extracting something, classification over large documents that you wouldn't be able to fit into the smaller context window. That's number one. Number two, you know, you're very deep into a session. You're about to hit the limit on a 256K context window size, but instead of getting compression or compaction and the thing turning basically brain dead, you get to push another 1 or 2 prompts and you get to push a little bit further. But of course you don't want that to be the default, right? So if that constantly happens to you, I would check, what you can improve in your process to plan better, to use more files as interim storage of knowledge and all the things that you can do in order to get away with a linear context window. But if occasionally it happens for a feature that is just gotten out of hand or Claude needed more wrangling than it was supposed to, then it can be handy. But again, I wouldn't want that to be the default. Then we have large code bases. So essentially we need a lot of context to make a decision, but it's just a lot of upfront context and then just 1 or 2 prompts that then essentially try to extract as much as possible, but not to build a lot on top of that, right? So this is a good use case if you're dealing with very big project, but it's still better to do targeted retrieval as you'll get better results. But if that's just not possible, it's obviously handy to have more context window. And then we have kind of history preservation. So if you have, multi-session agents and you just don't want to rely on compaction, but I think again, these are all kind of shouldn't really be doing this, and you'll probably get better performance with something else. But if you can't do it any other way, so what to do instead? Again, smart context engineering is still tricky, right? You need to curate your context. You want to compact early. You can always start a new session. You can use sub-agents for research. Anything that will fill context window a lot for the main agent can most likely be done with a sub-agent, but they come with their own drawbacks, right? So essentially they're just giving back summarized report, which means you're losing a lot of that context that you are summarizing because the summary will be lossy. So, or you can use RAG, which I don't necessarily, super recommend. Just don't have good experiences with it, but it is an option. And again, if you don't trust yourself to do these things, or if you just don't want to run out of your session limits very fast, it is also worth to just disable the context window, the million token. All right, so summarize, bigger context window doesn't mean a better model. It doesn't mean you can just forget about proper context engineering or proper hygiene. And it also is a very funny kind of case study in that you shouldn't just believe what the Claude Code team does, because clearly sometimes they're just talking out of their ass. But anyway, if any of the stuff sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video.